You know, true art is so hard to define. So many things fit into that category. Some people think of art and the first thing that they think of is painting, and other people think about knitting or simple crafts. To me, art is when you pour your soul into a piece of work and it shows. And I would definitely say that this strap is a piece of art. You don't need a whole lot to bead something really high quality. If you already have all the supplies you need, then you can skip this section. Just click the next timestamp in the video description. First, you'll need a loom. Now, this one is pretty modern and it's very versatile. You can pick one of these up online or from a craft store for about $10. If you take a good look at this loom, it's really very simple, so you could probably improvise one on your own. You'll need some beads, of course, and when it comes to beads, there are three main considerations. The first is the type. You should base this decision on your region and the purpose of your project. The use of wampum, bone, or glass is specific to certain tribes who lived in specific areas. Different natural materials possess different colors, and certain textures or shapes could help your design. Whatever you choose, make sure that it's something that you'll be proud to wear. Your second consideration is bead size. Certain beads within each material category, like glass, bone, or wampum, are meant for certain things. You should not make a powder horn out of hair pipe beads, for example, simply because that was never done back in the day. A good way to figure out the right beads for your project is to examine period artwork. Old paintings and drawings are great references when it comes down to cosmetic decisions, and with the internet at your disposal, you can pull up any of this artwork right after you finish watching this video. Your third consideration is authenticity. Today, I'm using simulation wampum, and I am all about authenticity, but these beads were created by hand the same way as the originals, but they're made out of the most cost-effective material. One positive aspect of using beads that are produced out of modern materials is their standard sizing. Traditional beads are usually slightly different sizes, and those small differences can chalk up to really obvious incongruities in work of this size. Now, the next material that you need is your thread. I'm using this heavy waxed cordage, and I picked this because it's strong and it won't stretch over time. You need to be mindful that during the beading process, your thread will pass through each bead twice. So you need sturdy thread that's thin enough to pass through twice, or you need beads drilled wide enough to accommodate something thicker. You want your beads to fit snugly on two pieces of your thread because loose beads are noisy when you walk, but beads that are too tight are impossible to work with. And finally, we'll be using buckskin to finish up the ends and attach my powder horn. Have some scrap handy in a color that complements the horn and the strap. Today I'm using my simulation brain tan. This is scrap from a factory veg tan buckskin without any dyes. I synthesized this myself, and if you're curious about that process, then you can watch my video about it. That simulation brain tan video will queue up at the end of this video. Since we're doing a little leather work, I have a few simple tools handy, like my awl and some needles. This here is my leather needle wallet. As you can see, I have quite a few in here, and I'll probably really only be using one or two of these needles. And I also have some general sewing needles here. If you're going to be working with real thin thread, then you'll probably need sewing needles. Otherwise, you'll be able to move that thread in and out of the beads without the use of a needle. But as I said, I have an awl here and a tool to widen the holes that I punch in my leather. Once again, these are very simple tools, and you could come up with an improvised version yourself at home. Now, planning for a piece of work like this is everything. Take time to draw a pattern out on a sheet of paper. Your pattern needs to be clear and unmistakable. It can be simple, ornate, or the pattern can tell a story. You don't need to draw every bead specifically, but draw up enough that you can remember your pattern in case you have to step away from the project. Sometimes grid paper can come in handy for this purpose. Now take a look at the structure of a beaded strap. You need one more thread than the number of rows so that there's a vein on the inside and outside of each bead. The beads are held in place by an alternating thread that runs up and down each row, going over and under your structural threads to lock the beads into place. You need to cut lengths of thread the length of your project plus 12 inches to accommodate the finishing process. That 12 inches allows for an excess of 6 inches on either side of the length of your project. These pieces need to be exactly the same length. First, they need to be tied together and strung onto the loom. Tie the bundle together using one knot at the very base of your strings. You'll need to do this on both sides. Then, attach the knot to the peg on the roller of your loom. Run the strings through the wire and tighten down your threads. This is the foundation for your beadwork. If you get to this moment and you realize that one of your threads is tighter or looser than the rest, then you need to stop and address that problem. You'll have to retie your threads to accommodate a tighter or looser strand. These threads are your foundation, so identical lengths and uniform tension is very important. You need to space out your threads to allow enough room for the beads. If you're building your own loom, you need to be mindful that the tighter together your teeth are, the more versatile your tool is. Tight teeth like this are ideal for working with glass seed beads, and they are plentiful enough to account for this 1/2 inch thick wampum. As I mentioned, the beads will be held in their rows by another thread that snakes through the scaffolding to provide structure to the beading. You'll need to tie this length of thread to an outside strand at the beginning of your project. I prefer to run one length of thread all the way down the project. Sometimes that isn't feasible because pulling several feet of extra thread through every bead at the beginning of your project is a real pain. The alternative is using several threads and tying them off at multiple points along the side of the project. Unfortunately, this has a negative impact on the aesthetic because it leaves little knots down the outside of your belt. It's unclear exactly what American Indians did or if they did both, but I find that using one thread is sturdier. Having more than one little knot along the outer edge means more opportunities for one of those knots to come undone, and then your beads will be falling off the belt. Advocates for using multiple threads would say that having different sections acts as a failsafe, because if a thread ever gets sliced somewhere along the belt, you'll be able to pull all the thread in that section and redo the beading without having to scrap the entire piece. I make my projects to last, and the thread is nestled inside of the beadwork, so I'm not too concerned about that. Even if they did break, I would be content to repair one single line of beadwork, tighten everything else back up, and be on my way. In the end, few people will be able to tell which method you used unless they are really handling your beadwork up close. I'm going to explain how to add your first row of beads, and then I'll get into the actual construction portion of the video. Now that portion is primarily a time lapse, but I'll be stopping throughout to narrate as I explain how to correct mistakes and how to roll your work up onto this side of the loom to give yourself more room to work. If you'd like to skip to those sections, or if you'd like to skip the time lapse altogether, feel free to do so. You can do that by clicking the next timestamp in the description section of this video. So now I'll get into explaining exactly how you're going to affix your beads to this scaffolding that we've built here. Your first step, of course, is always to consult your pattern. Before you make any changes and thread any beads onto your needle, you need to check your pattern to make sure that you're adding the right beads. Mistakes here are time consuming and they're annoying to go back and fix. On my pattern, my first segment is made up of 3 white beads. And so I'll be threading these beads onto my needle and pulling the thread all the way through. Now, as I've mentioned here, this piece of thread, because I'm using one piece for the entire length of this project, is very long. But a little hack that I've found is to thread your needle up halfway along that thread so that you only have to pull through half as much. So I just had to pull through several feet there, and that might get a little time consuming, a little annoying. Your first step is to loop your threads under your scaffolding, like so. So once again, I'm pulling my thread through, and we're gonna loop this guy up and around. There we are. So as you can see, the beads are resting underneath the scaffolding. Now as this tightens up, you'll be able to set these in place and they'll keep their spot, which is really convenient because our next step is to go back over the same stitch, running over top of this outer piece here. So we're going back through the same holes in the same beads, and between each bead we'll thread the needle out there and check to be sure that we're going over. If you go under, once again, your bead will fall out as you roll it off the loom once you're complete, and that's a real pain to go back all that way and fix. So once we get through here, we have to pull the needle through. And in my case, I use a needle with a very small eyelet here, and so I was able to do so. And as you can see, as I mentioned before, our thread now is passing through the inside of this bead multiple times. So make sure that you're using a bead with a wide enough opening to handle that kind of traffic. So once again, I need to pull back through here. As you can see, our last bead is pretty loose, and it will be until we pull the thread all the way through. And I'm doing this here in real time so that you don't miss anything. Now, as I did that, I'm using some waxed cordage, so you might notice this little buildup inside of the beads, and that's just a result of the wax coming off of the cording as I pull it through. There's still plenty on here. This is still very sturdy stuff, but you can go ahead and clean that off as you work. Now, once I thread this through, I'm going to tighten this as tightly as I possibly can. You can see it ended up pulling in a row here along my teeth. And so because I don't want to have to constantly wrestle with it and tighten it, I'm just going to move this line in one tooth so that we have a little more tension here, a little more uniform tension on our scaffolding. So once again, tightening this down as hard as I can, and then it's on to the next row. And it really is that easy. You'll go over and under and over and under for every row throughout the entire duration of your project until you reach the end. And then I'll explain how you can tie this off and finish up the project. Now I have to stop right here because I'm starting to run out of thread on my loom. And this is a really easy fix. You by no means do need to go out and buy a loom that's really long if you're going to work on a really long project. You could actually use a loom smaller than this. What matters is the width between your roller here and the frame of your loom. And in this case, we have enough that we can continue to roll the beadwork up on one end to expose new threads. So I'm going to show you how to do that. The first thing that you need to do is to loosen both roller wheels. In this case, these are held on with wing nuts, and on most looms you'll find the same thing. Now this is a pretty tedious process because as soon as you do so, the tension on your loom releases almost immediately. And that opens us up to a new world of problems. If you're not careful here, you could begin to really damage your beadwork. So we need to try and maintain that tension best we can. So you'll notice I loosened this wheel, this one down here on this end here, and I also loosened this one. I'm going to tighten this wheel as I maintain the tension to the best of my ability on this other wheel here. And you'll also notice that there are knobs on these wheels, right here in this case, and under here on this one. And so as I roll this, the beadwork is going to have to go over that knob and roll up on this end of the loom here. And so we want to make sure that it goes across evenly. In my case, it looks like it's beginning to slip towards the left. So we're going to have to put a stop to that. So now I'm in a tight spot because I have both rollers and they're both loose. So the one that I'm going to release first and tighten is going to be this one down here because that's where the majority of the strings are, and if we let this unroll, it's going to be a real pain to roll back up. So I'm going to drop that, tighten this guy back down, as tight as we can get them. There we go. And now this side is a little looser, so I'm going to adjust my strings. As you can see, they were starting to slip this way a little bit. So I'm going to, once again, tighten them up on this roller real tight now that they're in the middle there. And then we'll tighten down this side. And then you're good to go, you're good to continue. Now in this project, I am a little concerned that my loom may not be wide enough. And in that case, I may have to start inserting small sticks or something to take up a little extra space on the roller, and every time I turn it half a turn, I'll have to remove it and move that stick onto the other side, but that'll give me more girth down here at the bottom so that I can continue to roll up my beadwork. Whatever you do and however you make this arrangement, you need to be sure that you're keeping your beadwork as tight as possible. As you can see, I still have good uniform tension for the most part, and this string is a little looser than the rest. So we can do a little work down here, tighten it back up. And yeah, you just need to make sure that you're maintaining that tension and that you're keeping your beadwork down here at the base of your loom. If you accidentally started your beadwork here, you'll realize right now that that's going to be a problem because you can't roll it back that way. You need your strings to come this way. Now, if you've been watching my pattern develop all this time, then you've probably already realized that I just made a mistake. This black bead should actually be a little further on down the belt, which means what I meant to do was put on a whole row of white beading here. Now, I'm lucky that I caught this mistake right now, having just made it, because had I continued on, let's say my mistake was this black bead here, I would have to go back and remove all of this stitching to get back to this point. Now, you could always just clip the string right here and then pull everything off through, and then you'd have to reattach a new string to the side of your belt. But if you're looking to maintain real stability and to use one solid piece of string all the way down your project, then you're going to have to weave back through all your work and remove all of these beads as you do. So I'm going to show you how to do that process, and like I said, it's much easier because I just identified this mistake now. Your first step here, your first step of two, it really is very simple, is going to be to feed your needle back through the beadwork the same way that you put it through initially. So as you know, before I moved the needle through this way. So now going back through, I'm going to do the same thing. I have to be really careful now going through because there are a lot of strings packed inside of these beads. At this point, as I pull this through, there will be up to 4 strings being pulled through the inside of these beads. And so you need to be careful that the tip of your needle doesn't catch the middle of one of the strings and go through that string, because as you pull it through, you'll be widening a gap in your beadwork, in your string here, and that's going to lead to significant instability in the future. So I've gotten my needle through. Best I can tell, I haven't gone through any strings as I've inserted it. And because there is so many strings inside of these beads here, I'm going to have to use pliers to pull it through. And now that I've got it, once I pull this back through here, you'll see that my beads just hang just the way that they did when I first put them in. And from this point, you can just pull them back off your string, work them over the needle, pull everything back through, and then grab the beads that you meant to use and put those on and continue with your work. If you have to go back through a lot of rows, and you're going to have to repeat this process a lot, and it's okay to let your beads just collect on this string here, and you can pull them all off at the end. It might be a little easier for you. Now that our beadwork is complete, we'll need to finish off the beading and add some ends that complement the strap or belt. As I mentioned before, I'll be using my simulation brain tan to finish my ends and tie off my powder horn. Our first step is to remove the beading from the loom. All of these tightened rows will hold their structure pretty well, so you don't need to worry about keeping the strings taut. Once we take off the beadwork, we need to cut off the knot at the end, too. Now we're ready to affix our buckskin, and you can always reference period artwork, but the most traditional style is a simple rounded piece of leather. You'll want to trace a pattern that is just wider than your belt itself. Cut out this pattern twice, one for each end, and then size up your patterns against the beadwork to mark off where exactly you'll need to punch your holes. You'll be feeding the structural threads through these holes before you tie anything off, so make sure that the holes are just wide enough to fit the threads. You can always pull them through with a needle if the holes seem too small. Normally I would just tie off the two outer strings and then tie the resulting two lines together. In this project, the width of the beads spreads the threads out too far, and I didn't think that I could get very secure knots. Instead of fighting that extra width, I decided to embrace it by running the thread through another row of beads and then tying the knots off on the outside of those beads. I just use simple square knots for the finishing process, and you'll want to remember to cut off the excess thread so that it doesn't hang out of your ends. You can always put some glue on these knots too. In fact, I recommend it. Period adhesives like pine tar or rosin make for accurate alternatives too. Next, you'll need to design and cut your ties, and these will be looped through the end to attach the powder horn. Once my ties were attached, I cut them to give myself a little decorative fringe. The spot where the strap meets the horn is a right angle, and of course if you can break up hard angles in your clothing and accoutrements, then you'll be better suited to blend into the woods. Attaching the powder horn at the end was unbelievably exciting. I am so proud of this strap because it's a gorgeous piece of art, but it's also so utilitarian. Now combine all that with glued ends and really strong thread, and this belt will last well beyond a lifetime. The same beading techniques demonstrated in this video can be applied to any number of projects involving hairpipe beads, wampum, or glass seed beads. In every instance, quality beadwork is the result of extensive planning and attention to detail throughout the project. There are some features that are distinct to this project though. I measured every bead for a total length that would be perfect for me. The finished product sits nicely on top of my favorite possibles bag. It's short enough that it doesn't fly around when I run, and it's long enough that I could raise it to a powder measure alongside the muzzle of a rifle. If you carry something with your arm at your side, you'll notice that there is a sweet spot at your belt line where there's enough room between your wrist and your body to fit something like a powder horn, and this strap puts my powder horn right in that gap. The functionality of this piece, paired with its beauty, is a sharp contrast to the hard, rugged lifestyle of the American frontier. I am so proud of the work that I put into this. I love the result, and it looks awesome with my outfit. If this video gave you the skills and the knowledge that you need to start your own project similar to this one, let me know how that project goes in the comments section below. If you liked the video, as always, remember to like it here on YouTube so that I can get some positive feedback. And if you like the entire channel and the content that I'm creating, please consider subscribing.